The 2000 presidential election between the former Vice President Al Gore and then Governor of Texas George W. Bush was extremely close, with only 500 votes in the key swing state of Florida separating the two candidates. Many people today look back on Bush's win in 2000 with skepticism, citing the fact that the vote counting in Florida, where Jeb Bush was the governor at the time, was halted before all the votes could be tallied, leading the Supreme Court to preemptively award the presidency to Bush. In fact, the 2000 election has been called a turning point in the decay of the American democracy. However, in the world of the SCP Foundation, Bush's presidential win in 2000 wasn't just an example of shoddy ballot counting and Senate bias, but the result of a strange case involving alien parasites, body switching, smear campaigns, and farting cows. Yes, you heard that right. This is the story of SCP-4444 and the entity simply known as Garber Gore. SCP-4444 was first discovered in 1999 by agents Ringwald and Porterhouse of the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit, also known as the UIU. Ringwald and Porterhouse had been tasked with monitoring the phone calls of then-President Bill Clinton. Clinton was having a conversation with Joe Andrew, who was the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Joe was calling to report a couple things about Vice President Gore. First, that he was going to announce a candidacy for the 2000 presidential bid. Nothing too unexpected about that. But then he told Joe that there was an alien in his head. This was followed by a White House staffer witnessing him walk right through a solid wall. Given the strangeness of these claims, the UIU moved in to attempt to contain the vice president. However, this proved to be a tricky situation, because as Joe had stated, Al Gore was able to walk through any solid object. Unsure what to do, the UIU called in the SCP Foundation for some much-needed backup. The nature of Mr. Gore's anomalous properties were such that it prompted the Foundation to create an entirely new containment class, of which SCP-4444 is the only example. The new class, Ticonderoga, was named after the Iroquois word for an intersection of two rivers, and fittingly, the new containment class represented an object that was in between being contained and not contained. SCP-4444 was to be monitored, but not apprehended, as any attempt to do so would only aggravate his anomalous properties. During the initial monitoring stage, Al Gore's home was scanned with infrared cameras in an attempt to discover what might be causing the anomalies around the vice president. What they found was surprising. A long hexagonal spike engraved with alien glyphs, invisible to the naked eye and apparently intangible as well, was protruding from the back of Mr. Gore's head. Even though Al Gore could not be contained, the SCP Foundation was still able to interview him to try and ascertain the nature of the spike and the anomalous properties it caused. Present for the interview was Gore himself, SCP Site Director Alex Mabel, and FBI Associate Director of Special Units Adam Spironi. Initially, Spironi was uncooperative, and Gore himself dismissed Director Mabel's claims. But midway through the interview, he started to emit a strange noise, like a radio being tuned. Wondering if this was the spike trying to get in contact, Mabel asked, "Is anyone else in there?" To which he got this response.
"Wondernuts, name of Garber Gore. Presented."
Mabel tried to respond by introducing himself, but Al Gore interrupted by addressing the entity in the spike himself. "Well, hang on now, Garber, I haven't done proper introductions yet." Through the rest of the interview, Gore explained his situation. The entity in his head called itself Garber Gore, and while it could communicate verbally using his voice, there was a translation barrier that meant that its speech patterns and syntax were often unintelligible. Gore had been aware of his situation with Garber for just a few days, but in that time, the two of them had formed something of a bond. In fact, Garber was the one who convinced Gore to run for president in the 2000 elections. Mabel asked Garber what it wanted on Earth, to which it responded,
"Mine think the sustenance of Garber. Salacious desire undertaking encouragement. Downsize the conquest. Strongest most strong. Garber Gore presented misunderstanding. Strongest misunderstanding vice unequated. Goofy unnecessity for implementation Garber Gore on ThinkStem. Improvement situation by majority gathering selectors the vote. Garber Gore succeed presidential. Encouragement arrival the greater Garber."
Al Gore was quick to translate Garber's mangled speech. As far as he understood it, Garber had been sent out as an emissary for his species of interdimensional planet-hopping parasites that feed on thought. Garber's intention was to implant himself in the head of the most powerful person on Earth in order to facilitate an easy colonization. Garber's species were non-violent and unable to stand up to any kind of resistance, but if the leader of the free world was already merged with one of them, it would make taking over the planet that much easier. However, in a misunderstanding of Earth culture, Garber had gone for the vice president instead of the actual commander-in-chief Bill Clinton. Now Garber's plan was to fix that mistake by having Al Gore win the presidency. The SCP Foundation obviously couldn't let this takeover go unchallenged. Even though Garber's race were peaceful, seeking only to use the thoughts of the human race as a food source, further interviews and studies revealed that they emitted insanely high levels of carbon dioxide. To have a large number of them merge with the human population would spell total climate chaos, essentially hotboxing the Earth to the point it could no longer sustain life, even faster than humans are doing it. Since there was no safe way to remove the spike from the back of Al Gore's head, more drastic measures had to be taken. In a meeting with the FBI, SCP Site Director Crow presented a possible solution: an incorporeal entity vacuum chamber, which the Foundation had seen some success with in detaining ghosts and other apparitions. The only problem was, anything placed in the chamber would explode, and since Garber couldn't be separated from Al Gore's head, the results would be messy. Since the FBI was unwilling to blow up the vice president, that left only one choice. The SCP Foundation had to find a way to turn American voters against Al Gore. It wouldn't be easy to do without attracting suspicion. In fact, it would be almost impossible unless they were able to put a man on the inside. Thankfully, just such a person presented themselves. During a meeting, the FBI delegates let the SCP Foundation members know that, while it hadn't been leaked to the press yet, George W. Bush was in a coma in the hospital after being hit by a stray bullet during a hunting trip. His body was relatively undamaged, but doctors had little hope of recovering his mind. At this point in the meeting, all the SCP personnel presented turned to look at Dr. Bright. He was going to be their inside man, whether he liked it or not. The Foundation visited the hospital where Governor Bush was being cared for and moved him into Foundation care before he could be pronounced dead. There, doctors finished patching up his body and SCP-963 was applied, allowing the spirit of Dr. Jack Bright to take over his mind. Jack Bright, masquerading as George Bush, was now ready to run for office. The next step in the process was to start a disinformation campaign against Al Gore. There were a few proposed smear campaigns to be used against Gore. The first proposal was codenamed Tarbelly, a campaign that would have the Foundation blame Gore for the pollution of the water supply in a rural part of the developing world. This one was dismissed for being too outlandish. The next was Porky, which involved a rumor that Al Gore had once been caught in a compromising position with a pig. This one was dismissed due to not having access to convincing photo editing software. The third one was codenamed Star Wars, and it involved discrediting Al Gore by saying that he believed he was in contact with aliens. This was obviously shot down very quickly due to being a little too close to the truth for comfort. The proposal that was eventually settled on was codenamed The Other Monica, and the story centered around the idea that Monica Lewinsky was just an innocent patsy taking the fall for the person who Bill Clinton really had relations with, Al Gore. This rumor was the perfect combination of salacious and being just believable enough, making it the perfect thing to use to smear Al Gore's reputation in a country that still hadn't come around on gay rights. While Director Crow continued to refine prototypes for the technology that would allow the Foundation to interact physically with SCP-4444, the Foundation staged an early September debate between Gore and Dr. Bright posing as George Bush. The idea was to create a controlled atmosphere and mitigate any potential security risks. The debate was held in a church in Plainfield, Indiana, and moderated by Jim Leher. During the debate, Garber Gore did a lot of the talking for his human host, resulting in some utterly incoherent responses. When asked what makes him more qualified for the role of president than Governor Bush, Gore responded,
"When you see someone sitting in that chair, you want to know for sure that they're the best ambivalent vicarious corncrake caliper available for the job. And you can be sure that a vote for Garber Gore is an underestimated vote for respectability, neutrality, lampposts."
In the middle of the debate, an audience plant brought up supposed leaked photos of Al Gore and Bill Clinton engaging in their illicit affair. The crowd was understandably shocked, yelling and screaming in response. Now that the crowd was against Al Gore, Dr. Bright went in for the kill. He asked the people in attendance, "Do you want to see a strong man in the chair or a weak man under it?" At this point, something weird started to happen to the people in the crowd. They started full-on rioting, but then they started to change shape. In fact, the whole space started to shift. Al Gore stood up and started waving his arms, shouting,
"Garber unacceptable addition convention terraform unto dark magicianship. Spell, spell."
People rushed towards the exits, but found them blocked by the elongated forms of other members of the audience. At this point, the church was raided by both Foundation personnel and the FBI. Garber Gore fled from the scene, returning every attendee to normal as soon as they were out of Garber's line of sight. The debate was pulled from television, and anyone who watched it live was administered amnestics. Additional amnestics were administered to anyone who saw Garber Gore running through solid objects as he fled from Indiana to western Ohio, where he was found hiding in the loft of a barn. Meanwhile, Dr. Bright was punished by the Ethics Committee for his behavior during the debate, and agreed to act in a more professional manner for the October debates. Most of Al Gore's campaign team were undercover UIU agents who used audio editing to iron out some of the eccentricities of Garber's way of speaking before putting ads out. Most of them were able to be saved in the edit, but some were so off the wall they could never be shown to the public. In one of them, Al Gore stands in a field of cows and talks about how much greenhouse emissions are produced by farting cows. He then gives his solution to this problem, taping plastic bags over the backsides of every cow in America. Another rejected Garber Gore campaign ad that's much shorter but just as crazy features a video of a sleeping cat, with Al Gore narrating about how everyone should shave the backs of their heads. On November 7, 2000, election night, the SCP Foundation and the UIU watched the results with bated breath. If Gore won, they'd have to be prepared to use Director Crow's new vacuum nullifier device to simultaneously contain SCP-4444 and kill Al Gore. The SCP Foundation had killed public figures before, but never a president on the eve of his election. But then Florida started to tip in favor of Bush. After 2 days of recounting, despite losing the popular vote, Dr. Jack Bright in the body of George W. Bush was named President of the United States. The Foundation expected an outburst from Garber, but the entity remained silent. In fact, Al Gore has never displayed anomalous properties ever again. He conceded defeat graciously and more or less retreated from the public eye until the release of his film, An Inconvenient Truth. That wasn't the last the SCP Foundation ever heard of SCP-4444 though. On November 11, 2007, a mysterious broadcast aired on TVs across Gainesville, Florida that appeared to be a lost Al Gore campaign ad. It shows Gore sitting on a hill by the sea. In the distance, something large drops from the sky. Al Gore smiles and says, "I'm Al Gore, and I want to be your last American president." Now go check out SCP-1981 Ronald Reagan Cut Up While Talking and SCP-095 and SCP-3166 Monster Garfield Attack for more SCPs behind the scenes of real-life events.